Kazakh bodybuilder Yuri Tolochko marries his doll, Margot. Let's think about this. So we've talked about the slippery slope argument, but I want to bring it up again. And if you remember last time we addressed this argument, we talked about the fact that there is a fallacious use of the argument and what I would say is a rightful use. The fallacious argument generally says if we allow this to happen, then all of these things will follow. So maybe, for example, if we allow this man to marry his doll, then society will collapse and marriage will have no meaning. Or, other way around. Marriage will have no meaning and society will collapse. You're basically arguing for something without the ability to truly know that that will happen. And I heard a lot of Christians make that kind of argument when homosexual marriage was allowed in our culture. Well, if we allow this, then all of these things will definitely happen, type of arguments. But I would say there is still a way to use the argument that's not fallacious. And so generally the way that looks is, well, if you put up with this, then why not? Like what is to stop us from going down all kinds of rabbit holes? So we as Christians say, therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. God has designed marriage. Marriage is something that is natural. It is normal. It is functioning. If you go back to Genesis 1, it's tied to being fruitful and multiplying and filling the face of the earth. These things cannot happen in homosexual marriages. They simply cannot. Which is why the Bible would not refer to those things as marriages. Our culture does, our society does, our political climate does, and in fact, a lot of places that call themselves churches really don't want to fight this anymore. They don't want to even try to argue anymore. They feel like they've lost so much ground that why bother? And I would always remind us that we stand our ground where the Word of God does, and so God defines marriage. He explains to us why it is good for us. He explains the societal benefits, including the having of children that can ultimately shape the next generation. And so we hold fast to that category. We hold fast to that standard, I should say. But the world doesn't. In fact, the world has begun to realize they don't have a standard. And so that's where the slippery slope argument works. And it's why most of the time I post stuff like this and I just tag it slope slipped. We're gone. We've given up. There is no thing in the American or westernized philosophical system that really determines marriage anymore. Marriage has almost shifted to, well, if you have great affection toward this, and not even person anymore, but this, insert whatever, then yeah, you can be united in holy matrimony. Why not? And the historic, or maybe I shouldn't say the historic, but I think maybe a traditional response to Christians is, well, if you're going to allow that, then you're going to end up allowing bestiality. You're going to end up allowing pedophilia. And that's not to say that a relationship between a man and a woman is identical to those things. But what it does say is that there's no standard anymore for marriage. Marriage is whatever you want marriage to be. And so if somebody does come along, and this would be the argument I think maybe I'd make to somebody, or I'd ask them, and I think it's better to put it as a question to help somebody to see something than to argue, to make a positive case in this direction. But just ask people, if we allow this, if we allow men to marry men, then why can't somebody marry their sex doll? And just let them sit there. Okay? If we allow this, then why can't somebody marry their dog? And just let them think through. And they may come up with some forms of answers, but are they really substantial based upon their definitions of marriage. And this is important too. You may need to ask them if marriage is simply the union of two things that have affection toward one another, then why can't we allow this? Um, should we allow a 47-year-old uncle to marry his 18-year-old, 17-year-old, 16-year-old niece? Our culture says that 16-year-olds being sexually active, there's nothing wrong with it. So why not? Now, we have reasons for that. The Bible speaks about incestuous relationships. The Bible speaks about marriage in a certain way that really no godly father would ever allow something like that to happen anyways. But the world doesn't have those standards. And so I encourage you, use the slippery slope argument, but use it correctly. Don't say, well, since this has happened, therefore all these other things will follow, but use it as a question. You know, if this is how you're defining marriage now, then what is the standard, and why can't these other things happen? And make them be consistent. You know, if somebody said, well, a dog doesn't have the mental capabilities to consent, then ask them, are you saying that mental capabilities are your standard? Because most people don't say that. Most people say affection. Most people say, well, if they really love each other. Yeah, and just push them on that, but not in a mean way, in a way to encourage them to think through something. And so I want to encourage you, as our culture decays, keep taking every thought captive.